Ever notice how some ideas just kind of get stuck in your head? You know, like a catchy tune you can't stop humming, or a piece of advice that pops up at the perfect moment.
Oh, totally. Like that jingle for, what was it? That insurance company with the talking lizard. I can't get it out of my head. But yeah, then there's all that other stuff that just goes in one ear and out the other.
Right. You shared some fascinating material about this very thing, and we've been doing a deep dive trying to figure out what makes some ideas stick while others just vanish.
And it's not just about remembering things, right? It's about impact. Some ideas, they don't just stay with you. They actually change the way you think or act.
Exactly. Our mission today is to sort of distill the core principles, the underlying mechanisms that make a message resonate. We want to give you the tools to make your own ideas stickier, more persuasive.
It's like cracking the code of effective communication.
It's really cool to see how the materials you sent us touch on so many different areas. We're talking urban legends, advertising, even military strategy. Yeah, it's a pretty wide range of examples, all pointing to these common threads, these principles that make an idea memorable and effective. So, are you ready to dive in?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
All right, so your sources highlight this framework, this kind of blueprint for sticky ideas called the PsychCS framework.
It's like CCS.
Yeah, SUCCS. And it breaks down the 6 key qualities that sticky ideas seem to share: simplicity, unexpectedness, concreteness, credibility, emotion, and stories. We'll unpack each of these, but let's start with simplicity. It sounds pretty basic, but it's actually more nuanced than you might think.
Okay, yeah. Simplicity. So it's not just about like making things short or using small words.
Right. It goes deeper. It's about finding the absolute core of an idea and stripping away all the unnecessary stuff. Think of it like sculpting. You start with this big block of marble and chip away everything that isn't the statue.
I like that. So how do you find that core, that essence, when you're dealing with a complicated idea?
Your sources offer some great examples. One that stands out is the military concept of commander's intent.
Commander's intent.
Yeah. Instead of handing down super detailed, rigid battle plans that might fall apart the second things get messy, you give a clear, concise statement of the overall goal. Something like, secure that bridge. It becomes this guiding principle for every decision made on the ground, even when the situation changes rapidly.
Makes sense. So it's about providing direction without getting bogged down in specifics.
Exactly. And we see the same idea at work in the business world. Think about Southwest Airlines. Herb Kelleher, the guy who built the company, had this one unshakable principle: we are the low-fare airline. No ifs, ands, or buts.
So he stripped away all the distractions, all the potential add-ons, and focused on that one core idea.
Exactly. Do we offer fancy meals? Nope, not low fare. Do we have assigned seating? Nah, slows things down, increases costs. Every decision was filtered through that lens.
And it obviously worked. They're one of the most successful airlines out there. It's like that saying, keep it simple, stupid.
Well, maybe not the stupid part. But yeah, that forced prioritization, that ruthless focus on what truly matters, that's key to achieving simplicity.
Your sources also talk about how journalists do this with the inverted pyramid structure. They put the most important info at the top because you never know how much of the article people will actually read.
It's about not burying the lead. And it reminds me of that line from the Clinton campaign back in '92. It's the economy, stupid. Simple, blunt, and it kept everyone on message.
It's funny how sometimes you need a little bluntness to cut through the clutter.
Absolutely. And this kind of forced prioritization can be tough, especially for experts. They see all the nuances, all the connections, but that can lead to what the sources call decision paralysis.
Decision paralysis. So
Yeah.
like when you're overwhelmed with too many choices and can't make a decision at all.
Precisely. A clear core message acts as this anchor, cutting through all that noise and helping people make decisions. Think about Proverbs. They're core and compact messages, little nuggets of wisdom packed into a few words.
Yeah, like a stitch in time saves 9.
Exactly. Short, simple, but it packs a punch. And speaking of punch, remember Adams, the newspaper publisher, his mantra was names, names, and names. Simple, but it conveyed his whole philosophy about local news.
But the sources make a good point that being concise isn't enough. You need that core, that substance. Otherwise, it's just a catchy slogan that doesn't really mean anything.
Right. And this brings us to a really interesting concept: the curse of knowledge.
The curse of knowledge. Sounds ominous.
It can be. The more you become an expert in something, the harder it is to remember what it was like not to know it. It makes it difficult to simplify things because you assume everyone else understands what you do.
I see. So like a scientist explaining quantum physics to a 5-year-old.
Exactly. And the story of the Palm Pilot's development is a great example of how to combat this curse. They were so focused on simplicity, they actually carried around a block of wood as a reminder.
A block of wood.
Yeah, it represented their commitment to doing a few things really well rather than trying to cram in every feature imaginable.
That's so clever. It's like a visual proverb.
Yeah, exactly. So to recap, finding that core message, keeping it concise, and fighting against the curse of knowledge, that's how we achieve true simplicity.
Okay, so simplicity down. What's the next ingredient in the success mix?
All right, next up is unexpectedness. It's all about grabbing people's attention by breaking a pattern, defying their expectations, and creating a sense of surprise.
So like a jump scare in a horror movie.
Not quite. The sources differentiate between gimmicky surprise, which is just fleeting and superficial, and what they call post-dictable surprise.
Post-dictable. That's a mouthful.
It basically means the surprise makes sense in retrospect. It's like, whoa, I didn't see that coming, but now that you mention it, it fits.
Okay. So like a plot twist that you don't see coming, but then it totally makes sense once it's revealed.
Exactly. One of the examples they give is a really effective flight safety announcement. Instead of the usual boring spiel, the flight attendant started telling jokes.
Jokes on a flight safety announcement.
Yeah. It was totally unexpected, but it kept people engaged. But the sources emphasize it's not just about being random or wacky. The surprise needs to connect to your core message.
Makes sense. It's like that car commercial where they show all these advanced safety features for a minivan.
Yeah, the one with the tagline, "Didn't see that coming." It plays on your preconceived notions of what a minivan is all about.
Right. You don't usually think safety when you think minivan.
Exactly. And then there's Nordstrom, the department store, famous for its customer service. Everyone says they have great service, but then Nordstrom takes it to another level.
Like that story about the employee who ironed a customer shirt.
Yeah. These unexpected stories, they create a knowledge gap. They make you wonder, wow, how do they do that? And then they fill that gap with the Nordstrom brand.
So it's not just about providing information, it's about strategically revealing it.
Right. And the sources give a cautionary tale about the Inter-Community Peace and Justice Center. They had this surprising statistic about U.S. foreign aid spending, but they buried it at the end of a long, boring message.
So the surprise was there, but it got lost in the noise.
Exactly. And this leads to the power of posing a puzzle. They use the example of an astronomer talking about Saturn's rings.
Saturn's rings.
Yeah. Instead of launching into a dry explanation, he starts by asking, what are they made of? Why do different scientists have such different answers?
So he immediately sparks your curiosity. You want to know the answer.
Right. It triggers what they call the gap theory of curiosity. We're most curious when we realize there's a gap between what we know and what we want to know.
It's like a mental itch you need to scratch.
Exactly. And this applies even to something like fundraising. The sources describe a campaign that struggled until they started by posing the puzzle. Why aren't younger people donating as much? It made people curious to hear the explanation.
So it's about framing the information in a way that makes people want to know more. It reminds me of how Rune Arledge revolutionized college football broadcasting.
What did he do?
Well, before him, broadcasts just focused on the game itself. But Arledge realized viewers were missing context. They didn't know the players, the rivalries, the stories behind the game.
So he started showcasing those elements, filling in those knowledge gaps, and it made the whole experience so much more engaging.
Yeah, it wasn't just a game anymore, it was a story.
Exactly. So unexpectedness, it's not just about shock value, it's about strategically using surprise to highlight a knowledge gap and then satisfying that curiosity with your core message.
Okay, I'm starting to see how these pieces fit together. What's next?
Now we're going to get concrete. This is all about making your ideas tangible, real, something people can grasp and remember because it feels almost tangible.
The less abstract, more hands-on.
Exactly. Think about Aesop's fables, like the fox and the grapes. You can picture the fox, the grapes, the frustration, and the sour grapes rationalization. It's all so vivid and concrete, which is why the message has stuck around for centuries.
It's way more memorable than just saying, don't make excuses when you fail.
Right. The sources point out how abstract language, like business jargon or medical terms, can be really confusing and off-putting. It's like trying to build a house out of fog.
It just doesn't hold together.
Exactly. Concreteness is about giving people something solid to grab onto.
They give the example of the Nature Conservancy. They used to talk about their work in terms of bucks and acres.
Results you could actually walk around on, as someone put it. It was very concrete. But then they shifted to more abstract strategies, like policy changes, and it became harder for donors to connect with the impact.
So even if the work was just as important, it lost some of its stickiness.
Exactly. And this idea of concrete action is crucial. The abstract concept of customer service becomes vivid when you hear about a Nordstrom employee ironing a customer's shirt. It paints a picture in your mind.
It's like the difference between reading about baking a cake and actually smelling it in the oven.
Right. And this applies to learning as well. The sources contrast rote memorization with computing and context. Instead of memorizing abstract formulas, students learn math by working with physical objects and real-world scenarios.
So like using blocks to learn about fractions.
Exactly. It makes it much more tangible and memorable. And there's this fascinating case study about soap opera accounting at a university.
Soap opera accounting.
Yeah, they teach accounting by embedding the concepts in an ongoing story about a fictional business. Students make decisions and see the consequences play out, which makes it way more engaging than just crunching numbers.
I love that. It's like learning through storytelling.
And speaking of stories, the sources talk about the Velcro theory of memory.
Velcro theory.
Yeah, the idea is that concrete ideas have more hooks for our brains to latch onto.
Yeah.
The more details you provide, the more connections we can make, and the better we remember it.
It's like the more Velcro hooks you have, the stronger the bond.
Precisely. And they bring up Jane Elliott's brown eyes, blue eyes exercise. It's a powerful demonstration of prejudice, not through abstract lectures, but by having participants actually experience discrimination based on eye color.
That's gotta be intense.
It is, and it's incredibly effective because it's so concrete and visceral. It's not just an idea, it's an experience.
It makes you feel it in your gut.
Exactly. They also talk about how engineers, who often think in abstract terms, sometimes struggle to communicate with manufacturers who are focused on the concrete reality of building things.
So it's like they're speaking different languages.
In a way they are, and the solution is often for engineers to get their hands dirty, to literally work on the machines alongside the manufacturers.
So they need a shared point of reference, something tangible to connect them.
Exactly. And then there's Stone Yamashita, who built this incredible exhibit at Disney World to showcase the benefits of collaborative technology.
Collaborative technology. That sounds pretty abstract.
It is. But he created this immersive sensory experience that made it feel incredibly real. It wasn't just about the tech. It was about the feeling of connection it could create.
So he turned an abstract concept into something tangible.
Exactly. And when Kaplan pitched the idea for a portable computer, he didn't just list features. He described it concretely, like a notebook operated by a pen.
People could easily visualize it and understand its potential uses.
Precisely. Even when dealing with global issues like child dehydration, James Grant from UNICEF understood the power of concreteness.
He would carry around packets of oral rehydration salts and describe how they could save a child's life.
Right. It was a simple, tangible image that conveyed the urgency and impact of his work far more effectively than statistics ever could.
And General Mills, the food company, they sent their hamburger helper team into people's homes to actually observe how families were using the product.
Yeah, the Fingertips Initiative, it was all about gaining a concrete understanding of their customers' needs.
Instead of just relying on abstract market research, they got their hands dirty, literally.
Exactly. And this emphasis on concreteness even extends to target audiences. Saddleback Church created Saddleback Sam, this fictional persona representing their ideal member.
So it's like a composite sketch of their target audience.
Right. It forces them to think about their decisions through a concrete lens, asking, what would Sam think?
Makes sense. So concreteness, it's about making the abstract real, the intangible tangible. What's next?
Now we're going to talk about credibility. This is all about making people believe in your ideas.
Seems pretty straightforward. But how do you actually build credibility?
Your sources dive into that, and they start with a fascinating story about two scientists, Marshall and Warren, who discovered that bacteria cause ulcers.
Ulcers? I thought those were caused by stress and spicy food.
That's what everyone thought back then. But their research proved otherwise, even though it took years for their ideas to be accepted because they seemed so outlandish at the time.
So, like, going against the grain of conventional wisdom can be a tough way to build credibility.
It can be. And they contrast that with Pam Laffin, a woman who appeared in anti-smoking ads.
What made her ad so effective?
She didn't shy away from the harsh realities of smoking. She spoke about her emphysema, her fat face, the hump on her neck.
Wow. So she used her personal experience to create a sense of authenticity and urgency.
Exactly. It was raw, it was real, and it was far more impactful than the typical scare tactics. The sources emphasize that vivid, truthful details boost credibility.
But they also caution against confusing this with urban legends, which can be vivid but not necessarily true.
Right. They give the example of the lazy lizard dance extravaganza, this supposed event that gained a surprising amount of believability.
Why? Was there something special about it?
Not really, but they included a specific, seemingly mundane detail. A 73-year-old participant named Thomas Dwyer.
So a small, believable detail made the whole outlandish story feel more credible.
Exactly. Sometimes establishing credibility is about using analogies that connect complex ideas to everyday experiences.
Like that professor who compared the world's nuclear warheads to a bucket of BBs.
Yeah, it gave people a tangible sense of scale and the potential consequences. It's what the sources call the human scale principle.
Makes sense. And there's that Cisco employee who explained the cost of wireless networking in terms of saved employee time.
Right. He translated abstract dollars into concrete minutes, making the investment feel much more justifiable.
And they also talk about the Sinatra test.
If you can make it there, you can make it anywhere.
Right. It's about using success in a challenging context to imply broader credibility.
Like Safe Express, the company in India that transports both Bollywood movies and high school exams.
Two very different things, but both high stakes and requiring absolute reliability.
Exactly. And then there's McDonough and Brongart, who found only 38 safe chemicals out of 8,000.
Wow. And the detail they emphasized was that those 38 were safe enough to eat.
Right. That vivid, almost shocking image instantly conveys the potential dangers of the other chemicals.
It's like the ultimate test of safety.
And then there's Wendy's Where's the Beef campaign.
That's a classic.
They didn't just claim to have bigger burgers. They showed it visually and let the customers judge for themselves.
So they outsourced the credibility to the audience.
Exactly. It's what the sources call testable credentials.
And they talk about the emotional tank analogy used in coaching seminars.
It's a way to explain the importance of positive reinforcement in a way that feels intuitive and believable.
So even abstract concepts can gain credibility through relatable analogies.
Right. And the NBA rookie orientation program about AIDS understood that simply presenting statistics wasn't enough. They needed to make the risk feel real and personal to those young players.
So it's not just about the message itself, it's about how it's presented, how it resonates with the audience.
Exactly. And that brings us to our next principle, emotions. This is all about making people care, making them feel something.
I guess facts and figures can only take you so far.
Right. And your sources start this section with a quote from Mother Teresa. If I look at the mass, I will never act. If I look at the one, I will. It speaks to the power of individual stories to evoke empathy.
It's like we can connect with one person's struggles in a way we can't with abstract statistics.
Exactly. And the Truth anti-smoking campaign is a great example. Instead of focusing on long-term health risks, they tapped into teenagers' anger towards big tobacco's manipulative tactics.
So they found an emotional hook that actually resonated with their target audience.
Right. It was far more effective than the Think, Don't Smoke campaign, which lacked that emotional punch.
It's interesting how certain words or phrases can lose their emotional power over time.
Yeah, the sources call this semantic stretch. Like, the word unique used to mean something special, but now it's everywhere.
It's lost its oomph.
Exactly. And Jim Thompson, the coach, recognized this when he reframed sportsmanship as honoring the game.
Because sportsmanship had become kind of a cliche.
Right. And by using concrete examples, like Lance Armstrong waiting for a fallen competitor, he brought the concept back to life.
Like he gave it a fresh coat of paint.
Exactly. And then there's the idea of appealing to self-interest, what the sources call why. What's in it for you?
It makes sense. People are more likely to care if they see a direct benefit.
Right. Like the early ads for cable TV, which focused on how it would enhance your viewing experience with more channels and better programming.
It appealed to their desires for entertainment and convenience.
Exactly. But the sources caution against assuming that everyone is motivated solely by basic self-interest, what they jokingly call Maslow's basement.
Maslow's basement.
Yeah, like focusing only on basic needs like security and esteem. They give the example of the Pegasus dining hall in Iraq.
Oh, yeah, the one that was like an oasis in the middle of a war zone.
Exactly. The leader, Lear, understood that people needed more than just food. He created this beautiful space with guest speakers and a sense of community, appealing to higher-level needs.
So it was about creating a sense of hope and belonging, not just sustenance.
Exactly. And the sources point out that even in politics, narrow self-interest doesn't always dictate people's views. The identity model suggests that people make decisions based on who they see themselves to be.
Like that story about the firefighters who were offended by being offered a popcorn popper to watch a safety film.
Right. It wasn't about the popcorn. It was about their professional identity. They took their job seriously and didn't need bribes to care about safety.
It's about aligning your message with their values and sense of self.
Exactly. And this ties back to the algebra example. The reasons they gave for studying it, methodology, procedural knowledge, were completely abstract and uninspiring.
It's no wonder kids weren't motivated.
Right. And then there's the Don't Mess with Texas anti-litter campaign.
That's a classic.
Instead of just saying littering is bad, they tapped into Texan pride. It became a matter of identity.
It wasn't just about keeping the highways clean. It was about being a proud Texan.
Exactly. And that emotional connection made the message stick. And the story of the piano duo is a great reminder that sometimes you need to dig deeper to ask yourself why, repeatedly, to uncover the emotional core of your work.
So it's about going beyond the surface and finding that personal connection that resonates with others.
Exactly. And this brings us to our final principle, stories. Stories are powerful because they don't just convey information, they drive action and provide context.
So it's not just about what you say, it's about how you say it.
Right. And the sources start with this gripping story about a nurse who trusted her gut feeling over a faulty heart monitor.
She went against the technology. That's risky.
It was. But she knew something was wrong, and she saved the patient's life. It highlights the importance of trusting your instincts, even when the data says otherwise.
It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the human element is more important than technology.
Exactly. And then there's the example of sharp talk among Xerox repair technicians.
Shop talk. Just casual conversation.
It might seem that way, but it's actually how they share knowledge and learn from each other's experiences.
So like those war stories you hear veterans swap.
Exactly. They're full of specific details and lessons learned, which makes them far more memorable and instructive than a dry manual.
It's like a living archive of practical wisdom.
Right. And the sources distinguish between positive visualization, which isn't always effective, and mental simulation, which is basically telling yourself a detailed story about how you will approach a challenge.
So like mentally rehearsing for a big presentation.
Exactly. It's like a flight simulator for the brain, allowing you to practice and learn from imagined experiences.
It helps you prepare for different scenarios and make better decisions.
Right. And they give the example of dealing with difficult students. Instead of abstract strategies, a story about a professor effectively handling a disruptive student provides a concrete model to follow.
It's like show, don't tell.
Exactly. And then there's the story of Jared, the subway guy who lost a ton of weight.
That was a really inspiring story.
It was. And it wasn't a carefully crafted marketing campaign. It was an organic story that resonated with people. The sources emphasize the importance of spotting these potential stories in the real world.
So it's about being aware of the narratives that are unfolding around you.
Right. And they highlight different story templates, like the challenge plot, the connection plot, and the creativity plot, which can help you structure and tell more compelling stories.
So like knowing the basic elements of a good story can make you a better storyteller.
Exactly. And they talk about springboard stories, which are designed to inspire action, like the story of the World Bank health worker in Zambia who developed a new approach to knowledge sharing.
So it's a story that sparks ideas and motivates people to make a difference.
Exactly. And it's interesting that when researchers tried to extract just the core stories from conference presenters, the presenters were really resistant.
Why? Because they felt like their ideas were being oversimplified.
In a way, yes. They felt that reducing their years of research to a few anecdotes was diminishing their work.
It shows the inherent tension between abstract knowledge and the power of storytelling.
Right. And the sources emphasize that effective stories need to be simple and aligned with your core message. It's not enough to just tell a good story. It needs to serve a purpose.
So it's like the story is the vehicle, but the message is the destination.
Exactly. So there you have it, the SECS framework. Simple, unexpected, concrete, credible, emotional, and stories.
It's amazing how these principles can be applied to so many different areas of life.
Right. Whether you're giving a presentation, writing an email, or even just having a conversation, these tools can help you make your ideas more impactful and memorable.
It's like a toolkit for effective communication.
Exactly. So as you go about your day, think about the messages you want to convey. Which of these principles might you be overlooking? What's one small change you can make to make your ideas stick?
That's something to really chew on.
It is. And we'll leave it there for today. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Absolutely. It's been a fascinating conversation.
Until next time. Ever notice how some ideas just kind of get stuck in your head? You know, like a catchy tune you can't stop humming, or a piece of advice that pops up at the perfect moment.
Oh, totally. Like that jingle for, what was it? That insurance company with the talking lizard. I can't get it out of my head. But yeah, then there's all that other stuff that just goes in one ear and out the other.
Right. You shared some fascinating material about this very thing, and we've been doing a deep dive, trying to figure out what makes some ideas stick while others just vanish.
And it's not just about remembering things, right? It's about impact. Some ideas, they don't just stay with you. They actually change the way you think or act.
Exactly. Our mission today is to sort of distill the core principles, the underlying mechanisms that make a message resonate. We want to give you the tools to make your own ideas stickier, more persuasive.
It's like cracking the code of effective communication.
It's really cool to see how the materials you sent us touch on so many different areas. We're talking urban legends, advertising, even military strategy. Yeah, it's a pretty wide range of examples, all pointing to these common threads, these principles that make an idea memorable and effective. So, are you ready to dive in?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
All right, so your sources highlight this framework, this kind of blueprint for sticky ideas called the PsychCS framework.
CCS.
Yeah, SUCCS. And it breaks down the 6 key qualities that sticky ideas seem to share: simplicity, unexpectedness, concreteness, credibility, emotion, and stories. We'll unpack each of these, but let's start